This second session of your taught EPQ lessons is focusing particularly on the planning element of your project. Now, you may already have some ideas about your topic or about what you want to do your project on, but part of the project is showing your mentor, showing your examiner what it is that you, the process you went through to get to that point. And we're also going to talk about timelines and how to construct your timelines and what we mean when we say that they need to be flexible. But the main thing is, by the end of this session, you should be able to fill in your initial planning documentation, which outlines your project to your mentor so that they can sign that off for you. So, why is the planning of your project important? Now, as I've said before, majority of the marks for your EPQ come from the process of creating your EPQ, and that the planning side of that is important. So you do get 12 marks in total for the planning section. This comes under the assessment objective 1, managing your project. So by not providing any of that evidence, you are knocking 12 marks off your possible final mark. So what do you need to show in terms of planning? You need to show how you came up with your topic. It wasn't just a case of, oh, I think I'll just do it on this. You have to show that there was some sort of decision-making process when it comes to planning your project. You need to show how you have planned to complete your project. So this is your timelines. So you're not just kind of like, oh, I'll go work on it as and when. I'm just going to kind of bumble along and hopefully get it in on time, maybe put an all-nighter the night before it's due in. I'll get there in the end. You have to show that there was, again, some decision making that occurred. There was some target setting, and that you've actually thought about how you're going to get the project done, and not just hope that it just appears. And finally, thinking about your initial research. Now, this is particularly for your initial planning document, where you need to kind of identify or come up with some initial starting points for your research. Now, this is not going to be the only research that you do. It's just kind of like, I want to kind of look at this question. I'm going to research this topic. I'm going to use these key terms. I'm going to look in this place or that place for these things. So in this session, I'm going to take you through that planning process, what you need to think about when it comes to coming up with your topic, and there are some activities for you to do in your workbook to go with this. I'm going to take you through different ways that you can do your timelines, and there again there's an activity, an initial timeline activity in your workbooks for you to complete, and I explain to you what it is that you need to be doing for these 12 marks in particular. So let's start off by looking at choosing the topic. Okay, now the project is on anything you like, anything that you're interested in, anything you want to develop further, but there are some caveats put in by the exam board to kind of slightly limit your project. So for example, you should avoid overly ambitious topics that are just too big to do in an EPQ. So it's about narrowing down from a big topic of, oh, I'd like to do something on mental health, or I want to do something on climate change. Those are too big. So you're going to need to narrow that down. You also need to avoid anywhere where you have a personal axe to grind. That's not to say that you can't do something you're passionate about, but it can't be a diatribe on something that has annoyed you. There does need to be some academic rigor to what you're researching. So it's not an opportunity for you to just kind of kick someone or kind of make a stand on something. You also can't have dual accreditation. Now, what this means is that you cannot do a project on something that is covered in your A-level specifications. So for example, you would not be able to, if you were doing A-level sociology, you would not be able to do a project on trends in divorce because we cover that as part of our specification. You can take it further, or you can take something that you hint at in your A-level specification, something you're not going to be examined on, and develop it. So for example, we look at media as a cause of crime in sociology. You might want to perhaps look more at video game violence causing real life violence. That's not something that is examined as part of the specification, so that would not be considered dual accreditation. So you can't do something that's specifically examined on in any of your A-level subjects, or if you're doing BTECs or GMVQs or anything like that. And finally, you have to avoid being too narrow. So just as I said, like climate change is too broad. Okay, it's too big, you need to narrow it down. But something that is too specific, you might struggle to find research on it. So you need to kind of have that balance between narrow and broad, where you can find plenty of research. There is information out there for you to look at and to analyse, but you don't want to go too specific or too, what's the word I'm thinking of? Can't remember. You can't be too narrow and you can't be too big. Okay. So when choosing your project, what do you need to think about? So there are a few things that you need to think about when choosing your project. The first thing is what do you find interesting? You're the one that's going to have to work on this. You're the one that's going to have to push yourself to do this project. So it needs to be something that's going to engage your interest. If you start doing a project about something that you, after 2 weeks, you're bored of, you're not going to get your project completed. So it has to be something that interests you. You need to think about how it does fit with your current or future studies or future career plans. So as I said, it could be something that you're developing from your A-level specifications or your BTEC qualifications that are not examined on. It might be something that you're looking at doing at university level. It might be something that links into a future career plan. But you need to kind of be aware of these things because you're going to have to make them explicit in your planning so that the examiner and the mentor know those kind of links. You need to think about access to information. You're going to need to think, am I going to be able to find research on this? Is there more than 2 or 3 websites or journal articles or books about this? Because if you can't find research, you won't have the range of resources required to get good marks in the use of resources, AO3. So you need to think, is this going to be something I am going to be able to find out about? Or is it too niche? Is it too narrow? Or am I going to be overloaded with information? So do I need to narrow it down a little bit more so I'm not overloaded with information? And also think about contemporary issues. What's happening in the world today? What's going on around the world that you could then look at and research and do your project on? Because that's important, because that shows to a university or an employer or an apprenticeship that you're able to move outside of academia and apply what you know, what you've researched to the world around you, and it shows that you have a wider viewpoint. You're not living in a bubble. Okay, so it's important to think about these things when choosing your topic. Now in the workbook there are 3 or 4 activities for you to do to help you think about this. Now these worksheets that are in your workbooks, you can use those as your evidence of planning, of choosing your topic. But what you need to avoid is having no evidence of showing how you chose your topic. Because if you don't have evidence of showing how you chose your topic, that you thought of a range of different things or a range of ideas, and all of a sudden went, actually, you know what, I'm just going to do this. You need to show that process. Okay. So timelines then. Let's talk about timelines. Timelines are important because, again, it's showing your planning. A timeline sets out what you want to do and what you aim to do and by when. So it's showing your targets, it's showing an awareness of the other things that are impacting your life, that your EPQ is not the only thing that you're doing. And before anyone suggests it, you cannot use your EPQ as an excuse for not doing the work for your other subjects. Remember, your EPQ is an add-on to your A-level program or your BTEC program. It is not instead of your A-level or BTEC program. So your timeline is a way of almost setting yourself prep, almost setting yourself the targets that you need to be able to ensure that you have completed your project on time. It needs to be flexible because things happen, life happens. So it's not a case of I have to have it done, this done by this or this done by this. The only set deadline, the one that cannot change and does not change regardless, is your hand in. Okay, so all your other deadlines do have some flexibility, but if you need to change them, you need on your timeline or in your journal, and we'll talk about journal in the next session, you need to explain why you've changed it. What happened to make you have to change it? Okay, so you should adapt and be flexible with your targets if you have to be, but try not to be. Okay, and as I said, they should be specific and targeted rather than saying, oh, I want to have my research done by Christmas. You need to have something, you need to have more in there by then. So if you're planning an interview, when do you want to have the interview done by so that you can write it up? So when do you need to email the person that you want to, the people you want to interview? When do you need to have your questions set by? If you're using internet research, give yourself some research questions or research terms that you're going to use at specific points. So be specific, be targeted, rather than just, I'm going to do this, I'm going to write my dissertation. Well, you're probably not going to write it all in one go. There's no one way to set out your timeline. There are commonalities or certain ways that are more popular, but you get to choose how you're going to set out your timeline. And I'm going to show you some examples of how you can set it out, but that's not exclusive. You don't have to pick one of those three. You can choose your own way, but there needs to be evidence that you have a long-term plan of what you want to achieve to ensure that you are going to get your project done on time. Okay, so your initial timeline, and that's the activity that we've got in your workbook, should give a general idea of your self-set deadlines, taking into account things like mock exams, assessments, holidays, Christmas, things like that, so that you can kind of go, well, I want to get this done by this, but I have to be aware of this and I have to be aware of that, and this might cause a problem. Okay, so that's what the purpose of that activity is in your workbook. It's a good idea to try and do kind of half-termly or termly timelines as you go, because as we said, things change and adjust and adapt. Life happens. So if you have your initial timeline, which covers the entire process, and then be more specific in your termly or half-termly ones, especially if you've got a specific lesson each week. In this lesson I want to do this, in this lesson, by this lesson I want to do this, by this, at this time I want to do this. By doing that, yes, you will change it, yes, you will adapt, life happens, but it makes it a little bit more easier to be specific. If you try and do the whole year or 8 months or however long it is in one go, it's not going to work at that level of specificity. Yeah, that is the word. Because you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. So if you try and do it half-termly or termly, it gives you a little bit more focus. And finally, as I said, any changes to your timeline need to be explained, whether that be in your timeline itself or whether it be in your project journal. Okay, but it needs to be explained. I didn't reach this target because, I didn't reach this deadline because, and so I've changed it to this. Okay, so timeline options. There are, and as I said, a number of different options. One of them could be a table, so something like this, where you've got list of tasks that you want to complete. You're going to give yourself an estimated time to complete it. You're going to give yourself a deadline for it, and then you're going to tick if it's achieved. If it's not achieved, why was it not achieved? What have you moved it to? Okay. Alternatively, there is another table timeline that you can use, which has broken it down a little bit more. So it's to talk about planning, talking about research, talking about your creation, all of that, and you can then kind of put when you completed it rather than setting your timeline out. Now, personally, I think the previous the table is more helpful, but as I said, it is completely up to you to determine if you're going to use these, what type of timeline you're going to use. Another timeline is a Gantt chart or Nat chart. I'm sorry, I don't quite know how to pronounce that. But these are spreadsheets. They're usually created on Excel. You've got the dates across the top. You've got your tasks down the side. When you're starting it, when you aim to finish by colouring in the cells and you use different colours for would like to achieve, have achieved, didn't achieve. And again, you would need to adapt and change that as necessary. The final one is the most common one. This is the one that most people use, is they use linear plans. So they have a timeline with various dates on, and then they put in what it is they want to achieve by these specific dates. So you could have, as I said, you could have a full project timeline with your general ideas on. You can have a half-termly one or a termly one, which is more specific and has the specific EPQ lessons on there. But it's not expected that you would have one timeline that has no adaptations, no changes, and is perfect. This element, the planning side of the EPQ, is messy. It's going to be messy because you're going to be constantly changing and adapting. So it might be that you have 3 or 4 different timelines that you've changed and adapted as you've gone through. Now, as part of your timeline, you do need to be aware of those deadlines that we've talked about before. So thinking about these are general times by which we would expect you to be at certain points in your project. As I said, that final deadline, the first day after the Easter holidays, 4 p.m, that is your deadline for handing in your project. If your project is not with your mentor by 4 p.m. on that day, they will not mark it. Okay, so it's not a case of 4:05, teacher's going to be hanging around till 4:30 waiting for you. If it's not with them by 4 o'clock, your project will not be marked unless there is major extenuating circumstances, and it will be up to the EPQ coordinator to determine whether or not that is an extenuating circumstance enough for your project to still be marked. So you can't just say, oh, I had a busy day and I forgot. That wouldn't work. You're in hospital with a broken leg? Yes, we'll give you extenuating circumstances. Okay. So our next session, we're going to be looking at how to do research.